A German shepherd emerged from the roadside brush, filthy, bone-tired, and haunted. But in her eyes there wasn't just fear. There was something deeper. Desperation. Clutched delicately between her teeth was a tiny bundle she carried as if her life depended on it. She limped toward a man who was about to get into his pickup truck, and without hesitation, laid the bundle gently at his feet. It was a puppy. Her puppy. Then, as if surrendering her last bit of strength, the shepherd did something no one could have seen coming. She cried. Her body trembled, breath shallow and labored, but she didn't budge. What the man did next will shatter your heart and change how you see loyalty in dogs forever. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Give this video a thumbs up and hit the bell so you never miss a story like this. Now prepare yourself for a tale of sacrifice, devotion, and a twist that will stay with you for life. The wind cut across the road like knives that night, whistling past flickering street lamps. Through that gloom moved a lone figure, dragging herself forward with effort. Her fur, once thick and golden, was now matted with dirt and grime. Each step throbbed in her worn-out paws, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Tucked in her jaws with impossible tenderness was a fragile spark of life, her pup. The German shepherd scanned the road around her, ears twitching at every noise, tense and alert. But all she heard were cars speeding by, none slowing down. She wasn't scared for herself anymore. Her fear was for the life she carried. The puppy, barely stirred, its tiny body shivering with cold and hunger. The mother nudged him softly with her snout as if urging him to hold on. Her heart pounded. She didn't have much time. Mile after mile, she had searched for someone. For hope. And then she saw him. A few yards away, under the dim canopy light of an old gas station, stood a man beside his truck. He wore a thick flannel jacket, boots scuffed by work, and a weary face as he locked the door. A human. The shepherd froze for a moment. She'd learned humans could be cruel. Too many had passed her by without a glance. But she had no more strength left to hope for someone better. She stepped forward anyway. The man, just slipping his keys into his pocket, caught movement in the corner of his eye and turned. His breath caught in his throat. There she stood, emaciated, filthy, staring right into him with eyes that begged without words. Then, slowly, and with care, she placed the puppy on the ground in front of him. The man blinked, confused. The pup let out a faint whimper, barely audible, and then something happened that took the man's breath away. The German shepherd began to sob, not in pain but in plea. Her chest shuddered. Her nose twitched with trembling exhales. Her eyes, wet, desperate, never left his. Please. Save him. The man felt something wrench inside his chest. He crouched slowly, hands shaking as he reached for the puppy. The little thing was ice cold, weak, barely breathing. He looked back at the mother. She wasn't giving him away. She was giving him a chance. His skin prickled. Where was her home? Where had she come from? No collar. No sign she'd belonged to anyone in years. Her ribs showed. Her legs were scraped and bleeding. This dog had walked who knows how far through hell just to bring her baby here. A knot twisted in the man's stomach, and then she did something that tore him apart. She took one step back, then another. The man's brows furrowed. Wait, he said, voice tight. But the shepherd only looked at him one last time, and turned around. She was leaving, saying goodbye. The man felt something crack inside his chest. He couldn't let it end this way. Not after everything. Wait. He called louder, firmer. The shepherd stopped. Her whole body stiffened like she was fighting some final war inside her, but she didn't turn around. The man stared down at the pup, so small and fragile, his chest rising just barely. With a deep breath, the man took off his jacket, wrapped it gently around the puppy, and cradled him in his arms. The tiny body stirred faintly, nuzzling into the warmth. The man looked back at the mother. "Don't go," he said, softer now, stepping toward her. She didn't answer, just stood still, head lowered. He moved closer. "You don't have to do this alone," he whispered. His voice was steady, calm. At last she lifted her head. Their eyes locked. What he saw made his throat tighten. A grief so deep, so raw, it nearly crushed him. She blinked. Then finally she stepped forward. She didn't rush, didn't shake, just walked, slowly, until she was beside him again, sitting quietly at his feet. Her nose brushed the jacket holding her baby. The man's eyes welled up. He knelt and stroked her head gently. She closed her eyes, just for a second, as if that single touch gave her the peace she had long stopped hoping for. In that moment, he knew. There was no going back. He looked at the puppy nestled in his arms, then at the mother, her eyes no longer pleading but shining faintly with something new. Hope. Without another thought, he stood up, opened his truck door, and said, "Let's go home." She didn't move right away, not because she didn't trust him, but because she needed to be sure this wasn't a dream. But when the man climbed in, baby in arms, and turned to her with the gentlest smile, she knew. She had found it. A home. With one last shaky breath, the German Shepherd jumped into the truck and curled around her pup. The man started the engine. As the road disappeared behind them, he realized nothing in his life would ever be the same again. The truck rumbled along the quiet night road, headlights cutting through the dark. The man kept his hands firm on the wheel, but his mind reeled. Every few seconds his eyes flicked toward the passenger seat. Wrapped in his jacket, the puppy lay motionless, breathing in slow, uneven patterns, still far too weak. On the floor beside the seat, the mother lay curled tightly. Her head rested near the pup, but her eyes stayed open, watchful. She wasn't sleeping. She couldn't. The man noticed the way she kept glancing up at him, her eyes filled with exhaustion, but also guarded, distrust and survival. Who could blame her? God only knew what she'd gone through to make it here. He exhaled, eyes back on the road. "You don't have to worry," he murmured, more to himself than her. "Nobody's leaving. You two behind again." The shepherd didn't react, not at first. Just a faint flick of one ear, as if the words reached some tired part of her brain. But in that truck, with the baby breathing against her side and a quiet human voice breaking the silence, something shifted. Not trust, not yet, but something like it. And for the first time in a long, long time, she allowed herself to hope. The man swallowed hard. How had things gotten to this point? He had no clue what a dog like her was doing out there in that state. He'd seen strays before, plenty, but something about her was different. She didn't have the vacant stare of a mutt used to loneliness. Her eyes carried something else, something shattered. Like she'd once had a whole life, and lost it all. He pressed his lips together and turned back to the road. He'd figure out her story tomorrow. Tonight, his only job was keeping them alive. By the time he pulled into his driveway, a weather-worn cabin just outside the village, it was already past midnight. He shut off the engine and glanced over. The mother dog was still awake. But what stunned him most wasn't that. It was what she did when he opened the door. She didn't bolt, didn't flinch. She just waited. Not a muscle moved until she saw him gently lift her puppy into his arms. Only then, like she'd been waiting for a sign, it was like her body remembered how to stand. With a quiet effort, she rose and followed him. He felt a lump rise in his throat. This wasn't just some stray off the street. This was a mother who had lost everything, and was now risking what little was left on him. Inside, the cabin was bathed in the soft glow of the fire dancing on the wooden walls. He brought the pup to an old couch, set out thick blankets, and shaped a nest the best he could. The mother dog stepped in but stopped at the threshold. He saw it instantly. Her body was shaking, not just from the cold, but from doubt. Was she really safe here? He crouched and extended a hand. She didn't sniff it, didn't shy away. She just stared, and in that gaze was something heartbreaking. Not fear, something worse. Acceptance. She was ready for him to kick her out. The weight of that crushed him. How many doors had slammed in her face before? He stood quietly and walked to the kitchen. She didn't move, but her eyes never left him. When he came back, he held a small plate. Leftover meat from the fridge, not much, but something. He placed it in front of her. She didn't pounce, didn't devour it. She just stared at it like it might disappear, as if it wasn't meant for her, and that broke him even more. "It's yours," he whispered. Only then did she eat. Slowly. With the aching sadness of someone who hasn't eaten in days but is too scared to hope. He let out a long breath. She hadn't just been abandoned. She'd been betrayed. When she finished, she raised her head and looked at him. He didn't move. Neither did she. They just sat there locked in silence. And something shifted. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was something close to hope. Cautiously, she padded across the room and climbed onto the couch beside her pup. She didn't make a sound as she curled up around him. The man felt a smile tug at his lips. She didn't know it yet, but this was already her home. Morning crept in slow and golden through the curtain cracks. The man woke to the sound of the fire still crackling gently. For a moment he forgot what had happened the night before, but when he turned his head and saw them, everything rushed back like a flood. There on the couch, nestled into the blankets he'd laid out, was the mother dog. But this time something had changed. She was sleeping, not tense, not on edge. For once she had let her guard down. He stayed quiet, just watching. Her breaths came steady and deep. Her chest rose and fell with calm. Her limbs, once coiled for flight, now lay loose and still. She'd eaten, found warmth, and for just a few hours, she had found peace. But when his eyes dropped to the puppy, his heart clenched. The tiny body was still too fragile. Its breaths were uneven, its movements nothing more than faint twitches. It didn't even stir when he stroked its fur. It was still fighting. Still fading. He sighed and ran a hand down his face. They needed help. The truck rattled down the dirt road, bouncing slightly around a curve. One hand on the wheel, the man held the puppy tight in the other, wrapped in a blanket. In the passenger seat, the mother dog stared straight at the bundle. Her gaze didn't waver for a second. Her instincts screamed not to lose him again. Every whimper made her lean in, nose twitching, checking, desperate to be sure he was still there. And the man understood. Without taking his eyes off the road, he murmured, "I'm going to help him." She blinked once, didn't react. It was like she couldn't let herself believe it yet. When they pulled up to the vet's office in town, he climbed out with the pup in his arms. The mother stayed pressed at his side. "Easy," he whispered. "I got you." They stepped inside fast. The receptionist looked up, and the second she saw the puppy, concern took over her face. "What happened?" she asked. "I don't know," he said, not letting go. "Found him last night. He's real weak. I don't know how long he's been without food." Just then, the exam room door swung open, and the vet appeared. "Let me see him," he said with urgency. The man nodded and carefully passed over the bundle. The mother whimpered low. The vet cradled the puppy gently and turned to head back. But when he tried closing the door, the mother dog pushed forward. "Hold on," he said quickly. "I need to check him first." She let out a soft growl. Not angry, just terrified. The man saw it instantly. She thought this was goodbye all over again. He crouched and placed a hand on her head. "I swear I'll bring him back," he whispered. She held his gaze, didn't believe him. But when the vet shut the door, she didn't follow. She just stood there, frozen. The waiting room went completely still. The man ran his hand over his face, exhausted, but said nothing. He'd waited, in hospitals before, for news, for results. But this was something else. This was helplessness in its rawest form. Beside him, the mother hadn't moved an inch. Since the moment the vet had closed the door with her pup inside, she hadn't shifted. Her eyes were locked on that door. Her ears, though drooped with exhaustion, stayed tilted forward. They didn't flinch at the slightest noise. No panting, no heavy breaths. Just stillness. Total silence. Waiting. The man glanced at his watch. Nearly an hour had passed with neither of them moving. He let out a long breath and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "He's gonna be okay," he whispered, not really to her, more to convince himself. The German shepherd didn't even blink. He looked sideways at her. There was something heartbreaking in how she sat. It wasn't just hope. It wasn't just worry. It was raw fear. Fear that when that door opened, her pup wouldn't be alive. Fear that this time, there would be no saving him. The man clenched his jaw and looked at the floor. What had this dog already lived through? After an hour and a half, the door finally creaked open. The vet stepped out, holding the puppy wrapped in the same worn blanket. His face was serious, but not defeated. The German shepherd stood instantly. Her body tensed like a coiled spring. Ears up, eyes wide and fixed on the bundle in the vet's arms. The man saw her draw in a breath and hold it. The vet crouched slowly and offered the pup forward. "Still weak," he said gently, "but he's got a shot." The man didn't have time to react. She was already there. All the fatigue, the pain, it vanished in a blink. She rushed to her baby, sniffing him over, licking him as if to confirm he was real. And then she made a sound, a low, trembling whimper that broke everyone's heart. It wasn't just relief. It wasn't just sorrow. It was everything at once. The man felt his throat tighten. The shepherd dropped to her forelegs, curling her body around the pup, muzzle covering him as if vowing never to let go again. The vet exhaled. "He'll need warmth, milk, and constant care. I don't know how long he went without food, but if he makes it through the next 48 hours, he's got a chance." The man nodded. "We'll do whatever it takes." The vet glanced at the mother and allowed himself a faint smile. "I think she will too." When they stepped out into the sunlight, the man held the truck door open. This time the shepherd didn't need coaxing. She leapt in without hesitation. There was no way she was leaving him behind. Not ever again. The man climbed into the driver's seat and looked beside him. The puppy trembled in the blanket, frail, but breathing. and the shepherd watched him like he was the center of the universe. The man let out a slow breath, something stirring deep in his chest. He'd never wanted anything more than for this to work out. When they reached the cabin, the engine kept running for a few extra seconds. He just sat there watching them. She hadn't shifted the entire ride. Not once did her eyes leave her baby. Finally, he shut off the engine and opened the door. "Come on." The shepherd jumped down first, but instead of rushing ahead, she turned and waited. Her eyes moved from him to the pup and back again. The message was clear. "Give him to me." The man swallowed. "I'll carry him inside, okay?" She didn't move, didn't trust the words. So he did something unexpected. He held the blanket out to her, pup and all. Time seemed to freeze. She stared at her baby, then slowly reached out and took him in her mouth, gentler than a whisper, just like she had the first time. The man's chest tightened. He said nothing, just walked toward the house. She followed right behind. Once inside, the shepherd headed straight for the couch where they'd slept the night before. She placed the puppy on the blanket with impossible care, climbed up beside him and wrapped her body around him like a living shield. The man let out a breath, rubbing the back of his neck. He went to the kitchen, poured some water, and set out food. This time she approached slowly. Not frantic, not scared. Just steady, like she knew no one would take anything from her now. The man smiled faintly. She still didn't fully trust him, but she'd made a choice. And after eating, she returned to her baby and, for the first time, closed her eyes. Not out of exhaustion, not from fear, but because she finally felt safe. The man sank into his chair and stared at them. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of something bigger than himself. He looked at the mother, then at the pup. And he knew without a doubt he was never walking away from this. The wind whispered gently through the trees as dawn approached. When the man opened his eyes again, the fire was still smoldering in the hearth, casting flickering shadows against the cabin walls. Outside, the night had given way to a pale sky streaked with the blush of morning. But the very first thing he did, before checking the time, before reaching for his phone, was turn to the couch. And there they were. The shepherd was curled tightly around her pup, her body his only blanket. Her breathing was soft, steady, deep sleep. And the pup, still breathing, still alive. The man said nothing, just watched. Something inside him softened. For the first time in days, the shepherd had rested without fear. And her puppy, he might actually make it. He ran a hand over his face, the fatigue finally catching up. Then, he stood quietly and made his way to the kitchen. Time to think about next steps. As the scent of fresh coffee filled the air, the shepherd stirred. Her ears twitched. Her breathing shifted. And then, she opened her eyes. The second she saw him moving by the counter, she stood up. But this time, something was different. No panic. No suspicion. Something deeper had settled between them. The man noticed. He smiled. "Morning?" She didn't react, just stared. Then her gaze dropped to the couch. The pup was still asleep, still breathing. The shepherd exhaled slowly and took a step toward the man. Then another. Not because she had to, not from fear, but because, for the first time, she wanted to. The man placed the mug down and knelt beside her. "You know what's funny?" he murmured. "I still don't know your name." She tilted her head slightly. He chuckled. "Don't know where you came from. Don't know what all you've survived." She didn't move, but she didn't pull away either. "But I do know this," he said quietly. "You don't have to do it alone anymore." The shepherd blinked. Something shifted in her stance. And then she did something that caught him off guard. With slow, cautious steps, she came closer. She leaned her head into the man's hand. It lasted barely a second, but that second rewrote everything. The man felt something tug deep in his chest. "Ah, I get it now," he murmured, gently stroking her fur. "You just needed someone to say it, huh?" The German shepherd closed her eyes. Not from fear, not from tension, but from peace. And that was the moment he knew he'd made the right call. She and her baby were staying, for good. Outside, the early morning breeze swayed the trees gently, and the sun had just begun to spill soft orange light across the sky. The man sat alone at the kitchen table, both hands wrapped around a mug of steaming coffee, watching in silence. The shepherd never strayed from her pup. Every few minutes she sniffed him lightly, checking, confirming. Her muzzle brushed his tiny body with so much tenderness, and every time he twitched, she licked his head with a patience that felt endless. Elbow resting on the table, the man exhaled low and slow. This was only the beginning. The puppy was still too fragile. His little legs trembled. His eyes barely opened. His whole body shivered now and then, like he wasn't quite sure he wanted to stay in this world. But something had shifted overnight. There was a spark now, a trace of energy in his limbs. His paws no longer laid limp. Every so often he squirmed forward, trying to crawl across the blanket. And most importantly, he wasn't cold anymore. Hope stirred in the man's chest like the first flicker of fire on a winter morning. The mother had done her part. Her warmth, her instincts, her love. It had kept this little one alive. Now it was his turn. He rose quietly and approached the sofa. The shepherd's head snapped up, but she didn't growl. No teeth, no menace. Just alert, steady eyes. The man crouched slowly, raising his hands. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," he whispered. "I just want to help." She didn't back away. Her ears stayed up, but her body didn't tense. He inhaled and reached toward the blanket where the pup lay curled. As his fingers touched the fabric, the puppy gave a tiny whimper. Instantly, the mother leaned in to sniff. But she didn't block him. A shiver ran down the man's spine. She was letting him near her baby. It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of everything. With painstaking care, he slid a hand beneath the puppy's fragile frame, lifting it along with the blanket. The German shepherd's eyes locked on him, not with panic but with aching depth. She didn't stop him. He settled on the couch, cradling the tiny creature in both hands. The pup stirred, eyelids fluttering, tongue poking out as he felt the heat of human skin. "Hey there, little guy," the man whispered with a faint smile. The shepherd stepped closer. She couldn't look away. Every twitch, every blink, every soft sound from her baby, she watched it all. The man swallowed hard. She was still afraid, still worried he'd take the puppy away. So he did the only thing that made sense. He leaned forward and placed the pup gently back on the blanket in front of her. No hesitation, no delay, just a quiet return. The mother blinked once, then without pause nudged the pup back to her chest and curled around him. The man smiled. "Told you," he said under his breath. "You don't have to do this alone." The German shepherd looked at him, and for the first time trust flickered in her gaze. The day passed slowly, blanketed in a calm that didn't match the chaos that had come before. The man spent the afternoon fixing up the cabin, making sure the pair had a warm, safe place to sleep. Every time he passed by them, she watched, but not with suspicion. Each time he brought food or fresh water, she came a little closer. Each time he spoke, her ears perked with curiosity. And when night fell and the fire painted the cabin in warm amber light, something quietly miraculous happened. The man sank into the couch with a deep sigh, rubbing his face. He shut his eyes for just a moment, and when he opened them, she was there. The shepherd had risen from her spot on the floor and now stood beside him. She wasn't begging, wasn't searching, just there, watching him. The man's throat tightened. Slowly, cautiously, he raised a hand to her head. She didn't flinch. With the gentlest motion, he stroked the fur behind her ears. She closed her eyes, and in that heartbeat he knew he was no longer a stranger to her. They stayed like that, unmoving. The fire crackled softly, bathing the room in quiet gold. And for the first time the shepherd stopped guarding. For the first time she let herself relax. For the first time she felt like she was home. The man whispered, "Welcome." And in return she rested her head on his knee. No more fear, no more hiding. Just the beginning of something new, something whole. Days slipped by, and slowly, the rhythms of the cabin shifted. Each morning the man woke to the same sight. The shepherd curled beside her pup, always keeping him close, her nose resting on his tiny head like she could hold the world still with just her breath. But the puppy was changing. His breathing had steadied. His little limbs moved more each day. His eyes, once no more than slits, now followed shapes and shadows, locked onto his mother and even the man. And then, one morning, out of nowhere, he walked. The man was in the kitchen cooking when he heard a soft, strange sound from the rug. He turned, and there it was. The pup had stood up. His legs shook like reeds in the wind, his body wobbled. But he was standing. The man froze. The shepherd was already beside him, eyes fixed on every second. The pup stumbled, fell, flopped on his belly. The man held his breath. The little guy raised his head, twitched his ears, and tried again. This time, he made it. 2 steps. 3. Then, with a little squeaky yelp, he darted, if you could call it that, toward his mom and buried himself beneath her chest. The man felt something twist in his chest. He looked up, and the shepherd was watching him. Not with fear. Not with grief. With pride. Pride in her baby. Pride in herself. Pride in the fight she hadn't let go of. The man knelt slowly and reached out. For the first time he stroked the pup's head. The tiny body flinched, but then looked up at him with curious eyes. The man smiled. "Welcome to the world, little one." And then something magical. The shepherd wagged her tail. Barely, just a flick. A tiny motion that might have meant nothing to anyone else. But to the man, it was like the sky breaking open. That one flick said everything. She trusted him. She knew she didn't have to run anymore, that this was home. Weeks passed and the transformation was pure magic. The puppy grew fast. Those shaky legs now carried him across the cabin with unstoppable curiosity. His joy was contagious. And slowly, the mother let herself play again. The man couldn't help but laugh the first time he saw her chasing her, pup around the grass, pretending to catch him but always letting him get away. The little guy bounced from one side to the other, rolling and tumbling. Each time he fell, she nuzzled him back up with love. It was beautiful. It was what they deserved. A family, a future, and a chance to just be. From the porch, the man watched with a peace he hadn't felt in years. And then, like the truth had just landed in his chest, he said aloud what he'd known all along. "I think it's time you had names." The shepherd stopped. So did the pup. The man folded his arms. "How about Luna?" he offered. The shepherd blinked. He shrugged. "Strong, beautiful, like you." She kept staring. Then barely, subtly, her tail moved. Once. The man smiled. "Luna it is." The puppy, full of beans, jumped in circles. The man knelt and gently scooped him up. "And you?" The pup gave a soft whimper and licked his chin. The man laughed. "We'll call you Saul." The tiny dog tilted his head like he understood. Luna came closer, sniffed him, and licked his ear. The man felt something warm rise in his chest. This was his family now. There was no going back. And he wouldn't want to. That night, when the man crawled into bed, something made him smile. The soft thump of paws, the whisper of fur against floorboards. Then the weight settled near him. He didn't need to look. He knew. Luna had curled up right beside his bed, her pup nestled in close. The man closed his eyes, heart full, peace wrapping around him like the blanket he didn't need. No more fear, no more solitude. Just the beginning of a life. Together. Forever. Luna thought she'd lost everything. But someone chose to fight for her. And now she and her son have what they never dared hope for. A home, a family, and the chance to just be happy. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and share it with someone who loves dogs. Together, let's keep telling stories of hope and second chances.